My name is Lena Marine, I'm 35 years old, and I'm sitting at a long mahogany table in a restaurant on the Valencia waterfront. The occasion? The official reading of my grandfather's will. Around me, the Marine family waits with an air of practiced solemnity. But beneath the silence, I can feel it: expectation, calculation, greed. My sister Camila, 3 years older, flawless in her cream designer suit, taps her manicured nails on the stem of a wine glass, impatient for the lawyer to begin. She already knows she's the star of today's show. She always is. When the lawyer finally clears his throat and opens the envelope, my chest tightens. For a brief moment, I imagine, no, I hope, that maybe this time, just once, my name will carry more weight than hers. But no. To my beloved granddaughter Camila Marine, I leave full ownership of Marine & Sons Roasters, including all facilities, the brand, and associated assets. The family coffee business. The empire my grandfather built with his bare hands, roasting beans in a tiny workshop before expanding into a chain of cafes and distribution contracts across Spain. It isn't just valuable, it's prestigious. A legacy. Camila's face lights up, triumphant. She squeezes our father's hand as if she's just been crowned Queen of Valencia. And to my granddaughter Lena Marine, the lawyer continues, I leave my collection of legal volumes and my fountain pen set, with the hope she might find inspiration to pursue a more respectable profession. Respectable. I almost laugh. My father, a retired judge, nods approvingly as if this is justice served. My mother lowers her eyes, embarrassed but unsurprised. Camila smirks, tilting her head just enough to catch the diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. Books and pens, she says sweetly. At least they won't take up much space in your little apartment. My phone buzzes in my purse. Once. Twice. I excuse myself, step into the hallway, and glance at the screen. Altamar Capital acquisition complete. Entire commercial block near Estacio del Nord now under your control. Final documents ready for signature. Another vibration, a message from my broker. Congratulations, Lena. The deal closed early. Portfolio just jumped by 22 million euros. Dinner on me tonight. I breathe in, slow and steady, and return to the table. Camila is already making plans to modernize the roasting facility, talking loudly about fundraisers and client events she'll host there. My parents beam with pride, drinking in every word. I sip my coffee, plain, black, from the same beans our grandfather once roasted by hand, and allow myself a secret smile. They think I've been given nothing. They think I've lost again. But the truth? I've already won. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how one invisible daughter turned dismissal into her sharpest weapon, and found the sweetest revenge. When people ask me what it was like growing up with Camila as my older sister, I tell them it was like living under a permanent eclipse. Wherever I went, whatever I achieved, her shadow was already there, stretching long and impossible to escape. Camila was the golden child from the start. She had the glossy curls, the charming laugh, the sharp mind for debate. At 9 years old she won a junior public speaking contest, and my parents invited half the neighborhood to celebrate. At 10, when I placed first in a regional science competition, my prize ribbon was pinned to the fridge for exactly 3 days before being replaced by Camila's new diploma in mock trial excellence. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became the soundtrack of my youth. At the dinner table, my father, Judge Rafael Marine, would quiz Camila about constitutional law as though she were already at university. I sat beside them with my homework half hidden under the table, doodling diagrams for imaginary machines. My mother, Beatriz, always praised Camila's posture, her elegance, her future. For me, the best she could manage was, Lena is quiet, she doesn't cause trouble. I learned early that in our household, silence was survival. Camila wasn't cruel in the way villains are in movies. No, she was worse, effortlessly smug. She would pat my shoulder with her manicured hand and say things like, "Don't worry, Lena. Someone has to be average." Everyone laughed, including my parents. I laughed too, though my chest burned. By the time Camila was accepted into law school in Madrid, our parents had practically built a shrine. Another generation of Marines in the legal profession, Father declared, as though the future of the entire family line rested on her shoulders. My acceptance letter from NYU's business program lay unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days before anyone bothered to ask about it. When I finally explained, my mother wrinkled her nose. Business? That's so common. Law has dignity. It has history. Apparently, my blood was defective. I carried those words with me into adulthood like invisible chains. Every Thanksgiving dinner, every summer reunion, every family brunch in Valencia was the Camila show. Camila passed the bar. Camila won her first big case. Camila bought her first loft in Madrid. Meanwhile, I rented a studio apartment and paid my bills on time, which, in my parents' eyes, barely counted as living. But here's the thing they never noticed: I was listening. I was learning. Every time they dismissed me, every time Camila smirked, I stored that energy like coal in a furnace. The breaking point came at a family Christmas when I was 25. Camila had just announced her internship at a prestigious international law firm. My father stood and raised a glass, to Camila, the true success of the Marine family. The words hit me like a hammer. Not a success. Not one of us. The true success. Which meant, by definition, that I was the failure. That night, in my small rented flat, I made myself a promise. I would not beg for their approval. I would not compete on their terms. I would build something of my own, brick by brick, euro by euro, and when the time came to reveal it, the look on their faces would be worth every year of silence. At the time, I didn't know what that something would be. All I had was a seed of rage, a stubborn streak, and a craving for freedom. But sometimes, that's enough. By the time I turned 25, I was done being the family's punchline. I didn't want to be Camila's shadow anymore, or my parents' afterthought. I wanted a future that belonged to me, and I knew exactly what shape it would take. Real estate. While Camila debated case law in Madrid, I spent nights reading market reports, tracing rent prices on neighborhood maps, and highlighting entire chapters of financial freedom through property. My coworkers at the marketing firm thought I was boring, always eating leftovers at my desk, never joining happy hour. But I wasn't saving for a vacation. I was saving for a war chest. When I finally had the courage, I brought my plan to the family table. It was a Sunday dinner in Valencia, the kind where my father wore a tie even at home, and my mother's crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Camila had just finished describing a gala she'd attended in Madrid, and the room buzzed with parental pride. I waited for silence, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were my charts, my financial projections, my vision, a real estate investment company focused on undervalued properties in emerging neighborhoods. I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for a loan no bigger than the one my parents had happily given Camila for her condo down payment in Madrid. My father chuckled before he'd even opened the folder. Lena, be realistic. Real estate takes capital and connections. You have neither. My mother sighed, shaking her head. Sweetheart, you're a dreamer. Camila needed that loan because she was building her future in law. That's a profession with dignity. Business, it's risky. And frankly, beneath you. Camila leaned back in her chair, filing her nails as if the entire conversation bored her. Then she added, almost lazily. Maybe you should try something more your speed, sis. Retail management, maybe. You've always been good at folding sweaters. The table erupted in laughter. Everyone except me. That night, in my tiny rented studio, I stared at the folder my father had pushed back across the table, untouched, unread. Rage and humiliation swirled inside me, but beneath it all was something stronger, clarity. If my family wouldn't back me, I'd back myself. I started small, painfully small. By day, I dragged myself through my marketing job. By night, I devoured YouTube tutorials about plumbing and electrical wiring, scoured foreclosure listings, and attended free seminars at the university. I lived on ramen and discount bread, skipped vacations, sold the last nice handbag I owned. Every euro was sacred. Within 2 years, I had scraped together just enough for a down payment on a crumbling duplex in Sagunta, north of Valencia. The neighborhood was scruffy, but the numbers were promising. Everyone told me it was madness. My family didn't even know I'd bought it. On weekends, I pulled on overalls and became my own contractor. I learned to tile a bathroom by trial and error, to rewire light fixtures by watching tutorials at 3 a.m., to negotiate with suppliers who underestimated me until they saw cash in hand. My hands blistered, my back ached, but each nail hammered into those walls felt like a declaration: I will not fold sweaters. I will build an empire. The first tenants moved in 9 months later. Their rent covered my mortgage and left me with a modest profit, my first taste of independence, my first step into a future no one in my family thought I was capable of. I didn't tell them. Not yet. At family gatherings, I let them believe I was barely surviving in a shabby apartment, treading water in a dead-end job. Camila sent me her old designer dresses with notes like, "Thought you might need something nice for job interviews." I donated them to charity. Every dismissal, every smirk, every "that's not for you" only made me hungrier. Because I knew something they didn't: the foundations of an empire aren't built in applause. They're built in silence, in shadows, brick by brick. And mine had just begun. By the time the paint dried in that first duplex, I had already set my sights on the next property. Success, I realized, wasn't a thunderclap. It was a quiet drumbeat, steady, relentless, and unheard by those who weren't listening. Property number 2 came through an estate sale. An elderly woman had passed away, and her children in Barcelona wanted nothing to do with the sagging house in Valencia's old quarter. They listed it low, desperate to be rid of it. I walked through rooms that smelled of mothballs and neglect, nodded gravely at every flaw, and offered even less than asking. They accepted. I didn't have contractors then, not really. Just the phone number of a retired plumber who agreed to show me the basics if I carried his tools. Together, we ripped out corroded pipes and installed new ones. When he left at night, I stayed behind, patching walls, hauling debris, sleeping on the floor. My hands were calloused, but my resolve was sharper than ever. By the third property, a cramped flat near the port, I had stopped feeling like an imposter. I negotiated directly with sellers, haggled over closing costs, and learned how to smile politely while dismantling an opponent's argument. My marketing background suddenly made sense. I wasn't selling products anymore. I was selling myself as someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even if, some nights, I still cried in the shower from exhaustion. And still, my family had no idea. At Christmas, my father poured wine and toasted to Camila, the pride of the marine name. Camila preened, her new Madrid apartment the centerpiece of every conversation. I sat quietly, chewing roast lamb, my mind already calculating cash flows and renovation schedules. When my mother asked casually if I was still working that little office job, I smiled and said yes. The truth was, by then, I was already running numbers for something bigger. My fourth purchase pushed me beyond what one person could reasonably handle. I had to bring in others, painters, electricians, a handyman who became my unofficial teacher. The bills piled up faster than rent checks. For the first time, I considered forming an actual company. That spring, sitting in my one-room apartment with papers spread across the floor, I filled out the forms for Altamar Capital SL. The name was deliberate. Altamar, high seas, because I was done treading water. I didn't throw a launch party. I didn't even tell my friends. I signed the paperwork, tucked it into a folder, and went back to sanding drywall. But inside, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a side hustle anymore. This was the foundation of an empire. And as long as my family thought I was invisible, I had the perfect cover to keep building. By the fourth property, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. This wasn't just a side project anymore, it was the beginning of something much larger. I couldn't manage everything alone. I needed allies. That's how I met Joan Vila, a commercial broker with a sharp suit and an even sharper instinct for opportunity. I'd attended a real estate networking event in Valencia, clutching a cheap business card that read Altamar Capital SL in plain black font. Joan scanned it, raised an eyebrow, and said, "You don't look like a developer." "Good," I replied. "Developers don't scare people into selling. I do better when I'm underestimated." He laughed, and from that moment, we understood each other. With Joan's contacts, I stepped into bigger deals, small apartment blocks, neglected retail strips, and one grim office building with flickering lights and cracked marble floors. Banks still looked at me with suspicion, but I'd learned to leverage every asset I had: tenant rents, seller financing, and lines of credit that would have terrified most people. Debt was a tool, not a trap, if you knew how to wield it. Each project nearly broke me. Contractors vanished mid-renovation. Inspectors demanded expensive upgrades I hadn't budgeted for. One winter, a burst pipe flooded an entire basement level, and I spent a night with buckets and towels, crying from exhaustion. But each time, I adapted. Each failure became part of the blueprint. Meanwhile, my family remained in the dark. At Easter lunch, Camila bragged about her promotion to senior associate, her voice dripping with the self-satisfaction of someone who never doubted she'd win. "Madrid is exhausting," she sighed dramatically, "but worth it for the prestige." My father beamed. "That's my girl." Another Marine carrying the torch of justice. Then, almost as an afterthought, he turned to me. "And you, Lena? Still at that little marketing firm?" I smiled faintly, pushing my fork through roasted lamb. "Still there. Paying the bills." The truth? I hadn't set foot in that office in over a year. By then, Altamar Capital owned 7 properties, each generating steady income. I had quietly quit my marketing job months earlier, but I let them believe I was drifting. Their assumptions gave me freedom. That year, I celebrated my 30th birthday alone with a bottle of cava in my tiny apartment. No one remembered, except Camila, who texted me a photo of her new Porsche with the caption, "Happy 30th. Maybe you'll afford one of these someday." I didn't reply. Instead, I raised my glass to the flickering city lights outside my window. Not someday. Soon. By the time I hit year 4, Altamar Capital was no longer a secret side hustle, it was a machine, hungry for bigger deals. My small apartments and duplexes gave me cash flow, but I wanted scale. I wanted properties that would make even seasoned investors stop and take notice. Joan brought me an opportunity one almost didn't believe at first, a 16-unit apartment block near the Valencia train station. The owner was drowning in debt, half the units were empty, and the elevators hadn't worked in years. Most buyers walked away after the first inspection. I leaned in. "This is a nightmare," Joan said, flipping through the inspection report. "It's perfect," I replied. The numbers made sense, if I could secure financing. For weeks, I lived inside spreadsheets, crafting a pitch for private lenders. Banks were still hesitant, but private capital was different. They wanted confidence, not pedigree. I walked into meetings with polished investors in designer suits. They expected another shaky beginner. Instead, I laid out occupancy projections, renovation timelines, and profit margins. I spoke without notes. My voice didn't shake. They said yes. The day I signed the purchase papers, I drove past my parents' house. Camila's Porsche sat gleaming in the driveway. For a split second, I imagined walking in, announcing my new acquisition, forcing them to acknowledge me. But I didn't. Not yet. The building nearly broke me. The plumbing system collapsed mid-renovation. A tenant who hadn't paid rent in months barricaded herself inside one of the units. City inspectors fined me for not fixing fire doors fast enough. Every day brought a new disaster. But little by little, brick by brick, the place transformed. Fresh paint covered graffiti, new elevators hummed, tenants returned. 6 months later, the building was fully occupied, cash flowing, and valued nearly double what I paid. That was the moment I knew, I wasn't just playing landlord anymore. I was a developer. A strategist. A CEO in the making. My family, of course, still thought I was barely scraping by. At Sunday dinner, Camila bragged about winning a high-profile case in Madrid, her voice dripping with pride. My father raised a glass. To Camila, carrying the marine legacy forward. I clinked my water glass softly and smiled. They had no idea that, just hours earlier, I had signed a lease with a corporate client that guaranteed 6 figures in annual rent. Keeping the secret wasn't just strategy anymore. It was power. By the time I turned 35, Altamar Capital wasn't just a business, it was an empire. 98 residential and commercial properties stretched across Valencia, Alicante, and Madrid. My company employed a dozen people full-time and partnered with countless contractors. On paper, my portfolio was worth over 70 million euros. In practice, it meant I could walk into any bank, any negotiation, and be treated as a power player. And yet, to my family, I was still poor Lena. The daughter who never lived up to the marine name. That's why the day of my grandfather's will reading felt almost theatrical to me. Not because I expected anything, on the contrary. I already knew what my family thought I deserved. But I wanted to see it play out, to hear it said aloud. The setting was La Marina Club, my grandfather's favorite restaurant by the Valencia waterfront. The long windows overlooked the harbor, where yachts bobbed in the sunlight. Inside, the mood was solemn. The family lawyer, old Don Ricardo, adjusted his glasses as he spread out the papers. My parents sat stiffly at one end of the table, dressed in muted tones of grief but glowing with expectation. Camila, of course, had arrived early, her cream Chanel suit immaculate, her nails polished to a mirror shine. She held court like a queen waiting for her crown. Her husband hovered beside her, nodding dutifully at everything she said. I arrived 15 minutes early too, habit of discipline, not vanity. I wore a simple black dress from Zara, hair tied back, no jewelry except a modest pair of studs. My family believed I owned little more than that. It was the perfect costume. Don Ricardo began reading. Small bequests went to cousins and aunts, a painting here, a vintage car there. My mother and her sister divided stocks. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. To my beloved granddaughter, Camila Marine, Ricardo's voice rang clear in the quiet room. Camila straightened in her seat, smiling. I leave full ownership of Marine and Sons Roasters, including all assets, facilities, and the family trademark. The Café Roastery. The crown jewel. The legacy. Camila let out a delighted gasp, clutching the table dramatically. My parents applauded as though she'd just won another trial. Our Camila, my mother whispered proudly, carrying the family torch. I kept my face neutral, though inside, something twisted, not pain, not envy, but a kind of grim amusement. They truly had no imagination. Ricardo cleared his throat. And to my granddaughter, Lena Marine. Finally. I leave my collection of legal texts and my fountain pen set, with the hope she may yet find inspiration for a more respectable profession. Silence. Then Camila laughed, loud and sharp, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Books and pens, she said. At least they won't take up much space in your little flat. The words landed exactly as intended, a reminder of my supposed smallness. My parents didn't correct her. My father coughed awkwardly, my mother sipped her wine. I smiled faintly, nodding. Thank you, I said. Because what else was there to say? Camila leaned closer, voice dripping with sugar. You know you can always come visit me at the roastery. Maybe you could even help with some of the admin. Or folding sweaters if we launch merchandise. The table chuckled. Everyone except me. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my purse. Once. Twice. Insistently. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, not with humiliation, but with anticipation. The screen lit up, Altamar Capital acquisition complete. 98 properties officially under your control. Portfolio valuation updated, plus euro 22 million. A second notification followed. Herald Square project closed. Champagne tonight? Joan. I stared at the glowing words, the cold light illuminating my face, and almost laughed. Here I was, being handed a set of dusty law books while in reality I had just secured a portfolio that would make most established developers jealous. When I returned to the table, Camila was already scrolling through photos of the roastery on her phone, showing them off like a child with a new toy. We'll renovate this space first, she told my parents, maybe host firm events, charity galas. Imagine the prestige. My mother clasped her hand proudly. My father nodded with satisfaction. Congratulations, I said softly, taking my seat again. Camila smirked, clearly pleased. She thought she'd won. She thought the story was over. But I knew better. Because while she posed with her inheritance, I was already planning my next move. And soon, the truth of who I really was, and what I had built, would crash through their illusions like a tidal wave. Camila wasted no time turning her inheritance into a spectacle. Within a week of the will reading, invitations went out, a celebration of legacy and future. In other words, a party to showcase her triumph. The venue, of course, was the roastery. Our grandfather's pride, a brick-walled cafe that had once been the beating heart of the Marine family's reputation in Valencia. I hadn't set foot inside in years. The smell of roasted beans hit me like a wave when I walked in, layered with the artificial sweetness of Camila's chosen decor, gold balloons, fairy lights, a photo booth framed with the company logo. Camila stood near the counter in a cream cocktail dress, glowing under the spotlight of admiration. Her husband hovered by her side, her colleagues snapped pictures, and my parents looked 10 years younger, beaming as if the family name had just been resurrected. I slipped through the crowd quietly, accepting a glass of cava from a passing waiter. No one paid me much attention, which suited me perfectly. Camila clinked her glass for silence. Tonight, she began, her voice practiced, we honor tradition. My grandfather entrusted me with this legacy because he knew I would carry it forward with dignity. Marine and Sons is not just a business, it's a story, a symbol, and a promise. Polite applause filled the room. She basked in it, turning slowly so the cameras caught every angle of her confidence. But when she pulled me aside later, the facade slipped. This place is falling apart, she muttered, gesturing toward the roasting machines. The equipment is decades old. The inspector's report mentioned structural issues in the back wall. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to fix all this? I raised my brows, sipping my drink. A rough estimate. She gave me a sharp look. Well, it's outrageous. 6 figures at least. And the utilities, the ovens alone could bankrupt a person. Frankly, I don't know what grandfather was thinking, leaving me this money pit. It took everything in me not to smile. Later that night, as guests wandered the halls, I overheard my father trying to console her. It's a responsibility, yes, but also an honor. Think of the prestige. You'll manage, Camila. You always do. Camila's voice cracked, just a little. Not without massive capital. The firm won't finance me, not for this scale. And Bradley's campaign drained our savings. We might have to consider selling. I stood in the doorway, unseen, watching her shoulders slump under the weight of her prize. The same inheritance she had paraded hours earlier now looked like an anchor around her neck. I didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, I finished my drink, placed the glass on a counter, and walked out into the cool night air. My phone buzzed with an update from Joan, another building acquisition finalized. 98 properties strong. Camila had her legacy. I had my empire. And soon, the two would collide. Camilla's triumph lasted less than a month. By then, the shine of her inheritance had dulled, replaced by bills, inspections, and a constant stream of headaches. The roastery's equipment was outdated, the walls were cracked, and the ovens devoured electricity like a starving beast. One evening, I received a call from my mother. Her tone, usually smug when speaking of Camilla, was unusually tight. "Your sister is under a lot of stress. This business, it's not what she expected. She may need some help." Help. The word almost made me laugh. For years, they'd dismissed my ambitions as pipe dreams, and now they wanted my support. I said little, only murmured, "I'm sure she'll figure it out," before hanging up. But I knew where this was heading. A week later, Camilla hosted what she called a family strategy meeting at the roastery. The festive balloons were gone. In their place, files spread across tables, unpaid invoices stacked in neat piles, and Camilla herself, pacing with dark circles under her eyes. My parents sat stiffly, watching their golden daughter unravel. "It's impossible," she burst out, slamming an inspection report onto the table. "The renovations alone will cost nearly €1.8 million. Add the equipment, the utilities, the staffing, this place is a money pit. Grandfather didn't leave me a legacy, he left me a sinking ship." My father cleared his throat. "Camilla, calm down. There must be options." "There are," she snapped. "I've spoken to an agent. She has a buyer lined up. Someone serious, someone with capital. They're willing to take the whole business off my hands, facilities, trademark, everything. At least then we walk away clean." My mother gasped. "Sell Marine and Sons? After generations? What choice do I have?" Camilla cut her off. "Bradley and I can't afford this. The firm will bankroll me. Do you have €2 million lying around?" Silence. The door opened, and in walked a sharply dressed man carrying a leather portfolio. "Joan Vila, my broker." Camilla's eyes lit up with relief. "Joan. Finally. Please, tell them about the buyer." Joan nodded politely, but his gaze flickered to me in the corner. For a moment, surprise crossed his face before he masked it with professional calm. "Of course," he said. "I represent a client who has expressed strong interest. They're prepared to move quickly with a cash offer." Camilla leaned forward eagerly. "And who is this client? Some corporate? A foreign fund?" Joan hesitated, then glanced at me. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it's best if they introduce themselves." I rose slowly from my chair. Camilla's smile froze. "You?" she whispered. I nodded, folding my hands calmly on the table. "Altamar Capital is mine. Every building, every acquisition. And now, Camilla, I'm interested in adding Marine and Sons to the portfolio." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared as if he'd never seen me before. Camilla shook her head violently, her voice rising. "No. No, this is some kind of trick. You? You could barely manage your rent. You." Joan cut her off gently. "Miss Marine, your sister has built one of the most respected private real estate firms in Spain. I've personally overseen her acquisitions. She is more than capable of this deal." My father's face was pale. "Lena, is this true?" "Yes," I said simply. "For 7 years I built in silence, while you all thought I was struggling. I let you underestimate me, because it gave me freedom. And now, here we are." Camilla's voice cracked into a shrill laugh. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me suffer, waiting to swoop in." "No," I interrupted softly. "I'm offering you a way out. You can't afford to keep this business. You know it, I know it. My offer is fair, €6, 5 million for everything, cash, no delays. Take it, and you're free." Her hands trembled as she grabbed the report again, eyes darting across the figures. She knew I was right. She always hated admitting it. This feels like blackmail, she spat. It's called negotiation, I said. And I've become very good at it. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a draft of the purchase agreement, already prepared. You have 48 hours to decide, I added. After that, the offer expires. Camilla's face twisted in fury, but behind her eyes I saw it, fear. For years, she'd been the chosen one, the shining heir. And now, at last, the ground beneath her had cracked. The purchase agreement was only 22 pages long, but it felt like a century pressed flat. Joan laid the folder on the table, his pen aligned with military precision. Camilla stared at the document as if it might bite her. My parents sat between us like witnesses at a duel, eyes bright, back stiff, every muscle strung tight. I've reviewed your revisions, I said, keeping my voice even. No change to the headline number. Cash. Clean close. You keep heirlooms and personal archives. I take facilities, trademark, supply contracts, and liabilities disclosed in the annex. Existing staff retained with seniority. Modernization budget ring-fenced from operating cash. And an earn-out, if the brand returns to target EBITDA in 12 months, you get a bonus. Camilla's mouth twitched. So I get paid to watch you gut my grandfather's company. No, I said quietly. You get paid if the company lives. Silence. Outside, the sea breathed against the quay. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. Joan slid the pen toward her with 2 fingers. It's a fair structure, he said. And fast. You need fast. She looked at me, at our parents, then down at her hands, the manicure that once signaled victory now a stinging reminder of cost. You're enjoying this, she whispered. I shook my head. I'm finishing this. Her laugh came out brittle. Of course. Lena the finisher. She took the pen, hovered, set it down again. You built all of this while we called you a disappointment. My father flinched. My mother's lips parted, but no apology came, only a soft, wounded inhale. It's done when you sign, I said. Not before. Camilla signed. The sound was small, plastic nib on paper, a quick drag, the dot of a date, and yet it split the room open. Joan countersigned, collected the pages, and checked each initial with the devotion of a surgeon closing an incision. He smiled at me, professional but warm. Congratulations, Ms. Marine. Camilla pushed back her chair. For a second, I thought she might speak, but the words never formed. She stood, squared her shoulders, and left the room without looking back. My mother's hand fluttered toward her, then fell, useless. My father turned to me. Lena, he said, and his voice was the voice he used in court, careful, precise, stripped of comfort. I misjudged you. I held his gaze. Yes. A beat. You've taken a heavy burden. I've taken a business, I said. The burden is the refusal to see it clearly. He nodded once, as if a verdict had been read. My mother reached for me, then stopped at the edge of my sleeve. We wanted to protect you, she said. From what? I asked. Risk? Or from the possibility that I was never yours to script? Her eyes filled. She lowered her hand. Will you keep the name? For now, I said. People still trust it. We'll earn the right to update it. They left with Joan to finish procedural things, courier instructions, bank confirmations, a dance of signatures and stamps. When the door closed, I was alone with the ghost of a family legend and a stack of keys heavy enough to anchor a ship. I walked the building. The roaster room smelled like roasted sugar and old metal. The big drum roaster, grandfather's pride, wore a bruise of rust along its spine. Hairline cracks ran through the concrete near the back wall, the ventilation had rattled like a loose tooth. In the packaging room, a calendar still showed a month from last spring. Someone had drawn a smiley face on a delivery date that never happened. I ran my palm along the stainless table. Cold. Honest, Tomorrow, I told the empty air. Tomorrow we begin. The next hours unfurled in clean, decisive moves. I called Cecilia Rojas, the operations lead who had kept this place alive by force of will and aspirin. We're funded, I said. No austerity theater. We'll audit safety on day one. Replace what fails. Fix what can be fixed. And we pay everyone on time. She exhaled a laugh that sounded like a damn giving way. Then I'm staying. Not staying, I corrected. Co-captaining. Your contract's attached. Salary band, performance kicker, and an option tied to the relaunch. I called procurement to renegotiate green bean supply with transparent terms and traceability. I booked a local engineering firm to model airflow and temperature loads. I set up a training calendar, food safety, QC cupping, and a barista scholarship program for women who'd been told no too many times. At midnight, I stepped outside. The harbor lights embroidered a wavering path across the water. The cafe windows reflected a woman in a dark suit holding a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Lawyers, lenders, contractors, congratulations, demands. For once, none of it felt heavy. The next morning, we convened the staff. Faces I knew from childhood parties and hurried takeaway cups gathered in a half circle, roasters with burn-bright eyes, baristas with inked arms, a driver who'd been here longer than any of us. They watched me with caution, curiosity, and the bruised hope of people who have seen too many false dawns. I'm Lena, I said. You know the family version of me. Here's the working version. I don't believe in miracles, but I do believe in systems. We'll fix infrastructure before we polish the logo. We'll be boring before we're brilliant. If you've got ideas, I want them. If you've got grievances, I want those, too. Pay is straightforward. Schedules are posted 2 weeks out. Nobody gets shouted at. Safety outranks speed. And every good idea gets credit. Cecilia stepped forward, folded her arms, and gave me a long, measuring look. Then she nodded. First idea, she said. We stop pretending the main drum can survive another quarter. It's done. Then it's done, I said. We order the new one today. The room shifted, shoulders lowering, air easing, the smallest of smiles threatening the corners of tired mouths. Not joy yet. Not trust. But a tilt toward possibility. That night, after 12 hours of triage, I stood alone in the cafe, lights off, the city humming beyond the glass. I placed my palm against the door, and for the first time since childhood, the place didn't push me out. People talk about revenge like it's a blade, quick, gleaming, final. Mine felt more like a blueprint spread across a table, lines, angles, load-bearing truths. Not a strike, but a structure. Camila had the applause. I had the keys. And the keys were louder.